I like being surrounded by things that were touched by people's hands, or you feel a little bit of their brain in it. It reminds you of them. That to me is what I live for, especially in my home and myself. Everything feels personal.
Has an animating spirit.
Yeah. I'm a sentimental person, for sure.
Welcome back to The Materialist. I am Marc Bridge, the founder and CEO of At Present, matchmaker to extraordinary jewelry, and I am your host. We love talking about jewelry. We love talking about creativity. And those are the topics on the docket today for our conversation with Randi Molofsky. Randi, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Marc. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be in your illustrious list of podcast guests of people, great people in and out of the industry. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for enticing me to come down to Los Angeles, where the sun shines during the late fall.
Sure does.
You have been a defining voice in contemporary jewelry for a year or two. You are a connector between designers and editors and media and collectors and retailers. When someone asks you, what do you do? What do you tell them?
I think the word that you hit on that really does describe me best is connector. I think that's absolutely really where I excel, is putting people and things and places and ideas together to create something potentially new and exciting. And so I've really, interestingly, been able to work on all different sides of the luxury jewelry and accessory industry over my kind of 25 years that I've been doing it. And I've really been able to do it from every single angle, which has helped me, I think, become a better connector. Starting as a journalist and then moving on to working with brands. I've written books, and then I've also worked with gemstone mining companies. I've represent fine independent jewelers, and I also do mentoring. There's all these different parts and pieces of the puzzle that I've put together that I think help me maybe see things that not everybody's able to see, because I think I understand all the people that are involved in the different sides. I can see things from a retail perspective, and I can also see things from a designer perspective. And those things don't always work in harmony, but what I try to do is help those different sides of the industry work in better harmony with one another to create opportunities. And so that's a weird overview of what I think I do and what I'm best at.
And what today is a mosaic started with a piece or two. Where did it begin, and what was the glint or the glimmer that said, oh, I think I might meander down this path?
Yeah, it's funny because so many jewelry people have a family business somehow or started in that way. And I certainly did not at all. Nothing to do with
or congratulations.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know which one
either. It wasn't something that was preordained for me in any way. I actually went to college for journalism, and that's what I studied, and I wanted to be a writer. And I really wanted to live in New York City and work in fashion, and that's what I was passionate about. And
where did that come from? Was that something that existed in your home growing up, or were you just peering over the parapet going, oh, there's a really interesting world over there?
It was that. I was always really into fashion and accessories and clothes. And my mom was too, but to an extent, but it wasn't really something that was that available to me in the small town in Maryland where I grew up. There wasn't that much access. But I was a real magazine reader. I loved fashion. I loved clothes. Just something that really appealed to me. And I was interviewing for tons of jobs in New York City. I was like, I'm going to get my dream job at Vogue or wherever. But all of those jobs, you really were just sitting in a closet. You were a closet editor. You were just at someone else's whim and getting coffee for people. And one of the jobs I interviewed for was at a trade publication called National Jeweler Magazine, which at the time was a print magazine. Twice a month, it came out in print. And I don't know why, but they took a chance on me. They were like, you're young and you don't know anything about jewelry at all, but you're a good writer. And you seem like this is something you're really passionate about. So we'll give it a shot. And honestly, that job was the catalyst for it all. And I think it comes back to that idea of being a connector, because as the fashion editor of this magazine, I got to interview designers. I got to interview retailers. I got to travel around the world going to trade shows. I got to go to gemstone mines. I got to really see the whole jewelry universe from so many different perspectives that it opened up this whole world to me that I didn't even know existed.
What was your impression of jewelry before you went through the cupboard?
I think it was mostly like my mom's like fun costume jewelry, 80s and 90s, like working woman kind of power costume jewelry, those big earrings and big necklaces and like all that kind of fun stuff. And outside of that, there wasn't that much really. Honestly, it was little pieces that I got maybe for my bat mitzvah. Here or there, I remember all I wanted for my 18th birthday was this Movado watch with a black strap and a gold case. And I was obsessed with it.
The museum watch?
The museum watch, yeah. But it wasn't really, there wasn't that much else besides that. So I didn't have that too much of an understanding or knowledge of jewelry really at all. And I think that's why it was such a crazy education in the 3 years that I was there at National Jeweler. Just even understanding the levels of layers of people and things it takes to even make a piece of jewelry. And once I started learning that, then it expands your mind in a place where you're like, wow, there's so much more to this that I don't know that you can be learning forever, which is great.
We were talking earlier about our friend Victoria Gomelsky, who was at National Jeweler at the time, who told me a story about the first trip that she was ever sent on was to a pearl farm in Australia. And that was the awakening. Do you remember the first thing where you go, oh, that's what this world is about?
I think a couple of things. One, I think a week after I started my job, I was sent to report at JA New York at the Javits Center in New York City, and which is just, at the time it was a very big show and it was very overwhelming. And I was just like, my head exploded that there was like this thing going on, all of these people in this weird convention center with all of this insanely crazy jewelry. And so that was like being fed to the fire very quickly. But there certainly, the trips that both Victoria and I have taken, there's been some places we went, actually she and I together went to Tanzania to firsthand witness what was happening at the Tanzanite mines. This is a gemstone that's only mined in one place in the world. It's the only place you can find it, at the foothills of Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. And Victoria and I were lucky enough to go on this trip. And
give us an era here.
This was definitely in the early 2000s. And we were able to go down in the mines and meet the miners and see how that company, which is called Tanzanite One, how they had programs that were used to help the local communities, help build schools, help with healthcare, the way that they gave back, because obviously mining is also a complicated thing. And seeing that and really understanding where these stones are coming from, who the people are who are pulling them from the earth, I think that experience was pretty mind-blowing to really have that sense of, first of all, just the difficulty of even getting these stones, but second of all, just the way that we are interconnected globally in ways that you don't even ever think about. And so I think trips like that have always been the spark that like really lights you up, where you want to learn more.
Do you think anybody understands that anywhere else in the value chain, either people crafting things or ultimately people wearing them?
I think that's one of the hardest parts of jewelry, is getting a consumer to really understand where the value comes from in jewelry, why it's so expensive, the rarity of it. I think these are the pieces of the puzzle that we are still always constantly trying to educate about, because it is hard to grasp. It really is, especially if you walk into, it could be a Zales or even a Walmart or a Costco and buy a diamond ring or a sapphire pair of earrings. It's really hard to wrap your brain around the fact that this is something that grew from the earth. It took all of this time. It then had to go through these hands and cutters, and there's so much involved in every single piece of jewelry that I think that's always the goal of the industry, trying to get that point across. Some people do it better than others, but I think it's the hardest but most important part of the equation of telling the story of fine jewelry.
How much of the value do you think comes from that? Do we intuit as consumers that these things are rare, that they are finite, that they are difficult to extract, that they touch lots of lives? Or do we look at it and go, ooh, pretty, I like that color?
I think it's both. And I think both things are valid because let's say, for example, diamonds. I think that's a really interesting thing. I make a lot of engagement rings for people, or I help them choose stones. Diamonds are really interesting because there are the people who really only care about the valuation or the certificate and the 4 C's and all of those things. And a lot of times I'm sitting with a client looking at diamonds and they're like, but which one do I pick? Which one's the most valuable? And I said, and a lot of times I'll say, which one do you think is the prettiest? Because if this is something that it's yours, it's meaningful to you, it holds sentimental value, you want it to be something that you find beautiful. And so I think it is a combination of both things. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And I think that's really important for consumers to understand as well, that so much of jewelry is wrapped up in the sentiment, and what you find personally beautiful is just as important as what somebody else thinks is valuable from a price perspective. But jewelry is also interesting, like compared to, let's say, the art market, because jewelry, much more so than art, has an intrinsic value that can be discerned. Whereas you look at a painting that goes at auction for $3 million and it's canvas.
You're not going to date the frame.
Exactly. But jewelry does have that aspect to it, which I think helps us in many ways to have an everyday consumer to understand better. And these conversations happen more and more. In a moment like today, when the price of gold is skyrocketing, that's a conversation that you can actually look at some cold, hard numbers and say, gold is worth this much more today than it was then. Now, is that a good thing for everybody? Not. In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. Can I look at my jewelry box and say, wow, my jewelry box is worth a lot more today than it was 5 years ago?
Glad I didn't do anything with my belt drawer over the last 2 years.
But it's true. But at the same time, I work with independent jewelry designers, and the cost of production is dramatic. Prices have been increased so much. People have a harder time justifying the purchase. And so it's good and bad. But it is nice, especially in jewelry, to be able to point to things that are commodities and that do have value outside of the piece of jewelry itself. I think that's it. It at least makes people feel comforted when they make a big purchase.
I want to poke at that idea of commodity for a second, because my sense is that for the 20th century, that's what we were selling. That was the marketing message from De Beers. The pieces that were making their way into people's lives were solitaire earrings and 1-carat diamond in a 4-prong setting.
Yep. And
the conversation was about the diamond. And what it was set in was an afterthought at best. My sense is that you think there is more to this category than that.
For sure, for me, it is outside of that. I value, certainly design is a huge thing for me just in general, but it's also the idea of the way that the maker has interpreted, let's say, a gemstone or a design, or it could be something as classic as a chain link necklace, but a designer has interpreted it in a particular way that speaks to me. I always am drawn to the unique and the unusual in general. And so that, for me, is where I find kind of luxury to live personally. Luxury for me is more about unique than it is about commodity. So I'm not the girl who likes to walk into the big fancy store and get the brand new thing that everybody has and wants. It's beyond non-interesting to me. It just, for me personally, it's not interesting. I am much more the person who will be picking through the vintage bin, or I will be working with a designer to create something that is unique to me and my collection, and or going to Tucson to the gem fair to find a stone that like just makes my eyes sparkle and my head explode a little bit, and then do something with that. That to me is much more interesting and exciting than anything that feels commodity driven. And that's why, interestingly, with what De Beers is doing now versus what they were doing before, which was the 4 C's, and as we were talking about, and understanding what cut is and what carat weight and all of these things, and you need to spend 2 months' salary on an engagement ring. And now that they're pivoting to desert diamonds, off-color, traditionally less expensive stones, but I do think it's great in a way because it reminds people that they should pick something based on what they find beautiful to themselves. It doesn't really matter if it's a fancy, vivid, yellowish brown or if it's just a yellowy white.
Wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. It really doesn't matter, but I do like that it is evolving in that way to remind people that it's not all about either having that thing that everybody else has or that it has to be distilled down to numbers or measurements, because that's less important than the feeling.
And is it fair to say that philosophical underpinning is why you started your business?
I think so. Yes, for sure. So my business is called For Future Reference, and I call it a brand development agency where I work with independent fine jewelry designers to help them hone their brand and also help run their wholesale business and also do their PR. So I'm promoting the brands, I'm helping them figure out what their story, helping them hone their story, and also most fun for me, I get to help talk to them about design and collections and gemstones, and we riff off of each other, and I help out act as their in-house team a little bit to keep the collections evolving. And yeah, I really wanted to, I think all of my years of writing about designers, what I saw was that there were so many talented jewelry designers out there, and a lot of their businesses ended up failing. And it was mostly because they didn't have a good business partner or a good numbers person or someone who could help them do all the things you have to do to be a jewelry designer that sells in other people's jewelry stores. There's so much nuance, and it's so niche, and it's so specific because jewelry is a very specific category.
And almost wholly dissimilar from the skill set that makes you successful as a creator.
Correct. And so that was sad when I saw these great designers that were making beautiful jewelry but just couldn't sustain the business.
What were they missing?
They were missing, first of all, most of these people when you start out as a jewelry designer, if you are not like whatever, a billionaire, there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle to get your work out into the world outside of just making jewelry, and you just don't have time to do it all. It's impossible. And again, as I said, it's just there's a lot of saturation in the world of jewelry as well. So I
want to get to that, but before that, let's talk through what does it take to create a collection of jewelry? I came to you and I knew nothing. And I said, all right, Randi, I want to be a jewelry designer. What do you tell me?
First, I tell you, and people can tell you this. First, I'm going to say to you, don't do it. That's the first thing I will say to you. Do not do it.
It's the same thing that when everybody says, I'm going to start a business, and you have the grizzled entrepreneur always tells them that.
Don't do it. It's really hard. It costs a lot of money. It's very frustrating. That's the first thing I say. And a lot of my clients will say that I've said that to them. And it's
Does anybody believe you?
I think they don't have any clue. I think they have no clue.
Because if you knew, you would never
how
do
hard
it
is.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing I would say. But then second, really, I think the most important thing for me to know if there's a brand that I'm going to take on, it's that I really believe that designer, because I work with the people that I'm working with, they are the designer. They are designing the jewelry, whether or not they make it themselves. They are designing it. They are sketching, they're working in CAD, whatever it is. It's their vision. And I really have to believe that designer and that vision are inextricably linked, that they make sense together, that there's a real story there that's authentic and that feels real. Because if you don't have that and it's just somebody who's, I just want to make jewelry, like I want to hop on the bandwagon,
I like pretty things.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, you have to stand out in the way that the authenticity has to be there.
Give us an example, somebody that you met and it was just immediately kismet. This is somebody who was meant to do this.
Oh, gosh. I'm trying to think of people. A lot of people that I work with are emerging brands, but most of them have already started. Although, for example, one of my brands that I've worked with since day one is also one of my very close friends. Her name is Lauren Harwell Godfrey. Her brand's called Harwell Godfrey. And she used to be an art director in the advertising world. But she started making things with her hands, and she's, I just love the jewelry. I want to be involved in jewelry somehow, and I want to do this. And she's one of the people that I said, absolutely don't do it. But once she started designing, she had such an incredibly pure sense of what she wanted to do and what she wanted that jewelry to look like. And I think it's been probably, it's 2025, 2017 is when she started the brand, I think. The through line of her jewelry is, you still see it exactly the same from the beginning. It's grown and expanded, and it's gotten much more expensive and much more intricate and all the things that you would expect. But really, the identity, the visual identity of that brand remains completely true from when she started in 2017, because she clearly understood that she wanted it to be geometric. She clearly understood that she wanted it to reference kind of her roots in the African diaspora. She wanted to reference the antique textiles that she collected. And that stuff, it's still there. It's really still there. So it's amazing. There are some people, when you see it, as soon as I saw her starting to sketch, I was like, I understand what you're going to do. And this is going to be different than what is out there in the market, because again, it's so oversaturated that you have to see some point of differentiation, at least where you can say, this person, their jewelry will become its own visual language, and someone can recognize that without knowing who made that piece of jewelry. And when you start getting away from that is when you start losing the thread. It really needs to be visually identifiable for someone who would understand. And so that's what I look for.
You've used the term oversaturated a number of times.
Because it is, yes.
What does that mean?
There's just, jewelry became this, I don't know. There was a time that tons of celebrities were like, I'm going to have a jewelry line. And it just, everyone wanted to be a jewelry designer. It became like the hobby of wealthy socialites. And I'm not saying no one was good who did that, but I'm just saying it just became this kind of cool rich person job to have.
Baking sourdough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it became like a trend. You know what I mean? But it's also a difficult thing right now because, as I said, I work with the retailers and I work with the designers, and I have to balance the needs and wants of both of those people. And since
see the world very similarly.
Yeah, exactly. Having started 25 years ago and still in this, I would say the space between the retailer's wants and the designer's needs has grown further apart, those two things. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's so many jewelry designers out there that there's a lot of stores that'll just say, okay, if you don't want to give me your jewelry for free, essentially, there's someone else who will. There's someone else who will. Whereas it used to be a lot more of a 50-50 endeavor. There are certainly still stores that are incredible that we work with that are very supportive of the designers and independent brands. But I do think that it's widened the chasm between the two things because there's so many brands out there and there are people who are, I don't know, I'm not saying stores are taking advantage of it. I'm just saying that they have a lot of opportunity to find jewelry in many different ways, whereas what I'm trying to do with my agency is really help support and nurture these independent brands that are not billion-dollar companies. They don't have investors, they don't have boards, but making it feasible for them to actually be a jewelry designer.
Business, yeah.
It's really hard. It's a really hard thing. And especially now with how much it costs to make jewelry just in general, it's a complicated thing. So I take my job really seriously because I'm here to protect the brands that I'm working with from many different angles. I'm here to protect them, to make sure that they're financially supported. I'm here to protect them, to make sure, let's say, for example, they're not doing something that steps on the toes of any other designers out there in the industry. I consider that part of my job as well. And really making sure that their brand identity is wholly and completely unique to them. I find that to be key.
I'm curious about the role of the interlocutor or the mediator between these two parties, between the retailer as the voice of the consumer and the artist. What are those arm wrestle matches? Do you have to go to the artist and say, I get what you are doing here, and there is no commercial prospect for this particular thing?
Sometimes. Certainly, sometimes, yes. And I think it has changed a lot. The stores used to really look for collections that had a lot of layers to them, but that was like, here there's like an opening price point that's super affordable, and then there's suites of pieces that you could put together, the earring and then the bracelet and then the ring and the whole thing. And back when I started, I think we directed people more towards that as well, in order to present something to the retailer where they had a case of something that looked like, here's a whole story about this one thing. I think that's less so these days. I think the through line of the designer and the collection and the aesthetic needs to be there for everything. But I think stores are now more open to the one-of-a-kinds and the cool pieces and the unique stuff. And it doesn't all have to be this set of jewelry that's, you have each piece that works on the body. So I think,
7 strands of woven sterling silver and
Yeah. And so I think that's been a really good thing for brands too, is to be able to court this customer that is more interested in what I'm interested in, which is more of the unique and the exceptional and the unusual. Whereas I think people were used to be a little safer about that. Stores used to be a little safer about it. And now they're very interested in that. And I think that's also a byproduct of, as jewelry gets more expensive, truthfully, it's the very expensive pieces usually continue to sell well because, look, the rich people stay rich, right? And they're looking for something to invest in that will have value going forward. And if not even just the intrinsic value, there is like a generational thing. I can pass it down. Some people call this girl math. Oh, I'm going to buy this bracelet because my daughter can have it one day. Whatever it is, you know what I mean?
Boys do the math with watches the same way. It's not
correct. And I'm a watch collector
that is not
too.
a gendered.
No, it's not. And I love watches. But
alibi or whatever that would be.
But
rationalization.
But I think that helps fine jewelry in general, especially in turbulent times. People are looking for things to invest in that they don't feel guilty about. It helped us during COVID quite a bit because where I thought no one knew what was going to happen, but I certainly was like, my whole business is going to crash and burn and that's going to be the end of that. But in fact, people were like, I'm desperate to spend my money on something and I'm not going to buy a dress and I'm not going to buy a handbag because I'm not going anywhere and I can't go on any trips. So jewelry. And so there is an evergreenness to what we're doing that I think is valuable and important. But I think, to circle back to what you asked before, I think being this conduit between the retailer and the designer is really, it's important to have that person because a lot of times they're coming at it from two totally different angles. And we do a lot, my sales director and I, Marc, we do a lot to come up with creative solutions that make both parties happy. And I think you have to do that in every business, in every industry. But I think specifically now, as I said, it's gotten further and further apart. So we do our best to make sure that the brands that we're working with are so unique and so interesting that the stores feel compelled and confident to invest in them.
Is this just a rich person's game? Is the material cost and all of the other things associated with it mean that it is just a plaything of people with airplanes?
I would, in terms of the designer, the brands?
I was thinking about from the customer. I think that there's actually the other side of it also, that it's even more expensive to be a jewelry designer than it is to be a jewelry consumer.
It is. That's the hardest thing, I think. And it's funny because I do a lot of mentoring, and what we talk about a lot is just the price of entry to be in the jewelry business at all. And it's twofold. One, it's just a money thing, for sure. And two, is an access thing. As we said at the beginning of this conversation, a lot of people are in family businesses, or they know people, or they know the diamond dealers, or they have these connections or relationships that just, it's very hard to break into that world. It's a small industry. And
with no
it's
trust
quirky
until you have all the trust.
Exactly. And it's quirky too. And the people are quirky. And you have to really feel comfortable and confident to work with kind of these, whether it's a gem dealer or a metalsmith or whatever. It's like you have to figure it out on your own. And it's not easy.
And the mistakes are expensive.
Very expensive. And so in some ways, there are a lot of barriers to entry to work in jewelry. Even from a lot of the mentoring that I've done too, have been with these great BIPOC jewelry designers, young jewelry designers who they're like, how do I do this? How do I get into this? Like how do I fit into this world? And it's tough. It's tough. And I think that does, in some ways, restricts us a little bit as a business, because there are voices and there are designers and people who don't have the ability to break in. And that is something on the other side, we're talking about the art world, where there's a lot more using clay. If you're a ceramic artist, or if finding some canvas and paint, there's a lot lower barrier to entry to be able to be a creative artist in that sense than there is to be a fine jewelry designer. So I do think that there are oftentimes people and voices that we miss out on, which I find sad.
And from a diversity of what is being seen in the world perspective, do you see that consumers are looking for something else? I very much had the belief when I started at Present that the world was moving more toward, I want something different. I want something that feels unique. I want something that feels uniquely like myself. I want something that's expressive. And I was tired of seeing the same things everywhere, and I thought that everybody else was. And now I'm not sure that's right. How do you see that?
It's interesting because, so as part of my business, another arm of my business, I have a vintage jewelry business that I sell to stores and sell privately. It's vintage jewelry and watches, but the jewelry is all unbranded fine jewelry. And because I've always been very into vintage, which I think falls into this kind of category of what you're talking about, something that unique, something that no one else has. I love old things. I love provenance. I love the idea that something has been worn somewhere else by somebody. What parties did these pair of earrings go to? I love that. And so that's why I wanted to start bringing this unsigned vintage jewelry out into the market, because I felt...
Define that. Unsigned as opposed to this is not Cartier from 1956.
Correct. So there's tons of vintage and estate in the market, and there's tons of brands that do it beautifully, most of whom are doing signed pieces. They're selling an old David Webb, or an old Cartier or a Van Cleef, and there's a provenance, it's from this year, and that's what people are used to when they are buying antique or estate jewelry. And I very specifically wanted to stay away from that, because plenty of people do it and they do it very well. But I wanted to actually, again, lower that barrier to entry. Instead of saying this is all crazy, fancy, expensive jewelry, I wanted there to be an understanding and some education around the fact that there is so much fine jewelry out there in the world that already exists that's just not have a brand stamp on it.
So we're not Monet.
Exactly. And they're out there in the world, and they still have stories to tell. And in fact, it's less expensive as well, because we are not having to worry about today's gold prices or production or a lot of this stuff. I have a fabulous partner that I work with on the vintage business, and they've been doing this for 40 years. They have an incredible archive that I'm curating from towards my taste. But it's been an interesting thing, because we have really had to actually educate people. The stores that we've worked with, we're in Bergdorf Goodman or Twist, or we're in some really fabulous stores, but it is a little bit of an education where people are like, okay, so this is old jewelry that's cool, but it doesn't have a brand name, because most of the stores we work with are working with brands, so they're conditioned to want to understand who the maker is. But it does offer these customers something unique. These are one-offs, and when we go and do a trunk show with the vintage jewelry, I see people's eyes light up when they realize, they're like, wait, this ring, I'm going to get this ring, and no one else will have anything. And people ask me where I get it, and they're going to be like, oh my God, it's vintage, it's cool, it's from the 60s, whatever. And there is something there that I think was not always explored in this category that gets people very excited when they realize that they can cultivate and curate something that really just speaks to their personality. And so that's been very fun. And so that's something that, besides the fact that I love the idea of pre-owned, I think it's good for the world, I think it's good for the environment, I think it's good there's just so much stuff out there that's just there. But I think getting customers excited about that and start to understand it has been what has been getting me most excited recently, just because I don't think people just always understood it or thought about it. And
is that a different customer than the person who's the Alhambra girl?
You know what? I think it traditionally is a different customer, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make that customer realize that there's room for both. Because certainly the way that I wear jewelry and clothes, I wear mostly vintage clothes. I'm a real collector, but the way I wear jewelry is a mix. They work beautifully together. You don't need to wear only vintage jewelry together or only contemporary jewelry together. They work beautifully together. And so that's really what I'm trying to do, because clearly I still have this whole other side of my business that is incredible. I love working with these contemporary brands, and I own and buy tons of contemporary jewelry as well. But there is a place for them to coincide and for you to create, I always say, create your jewelry wardrobe that's like something wholly unique to you. And that's a mix of both things. And I had a job a while ago, many years ago, before I started For Future Reference. I was working with a luxury site called Portero, and it was a forerunner to like the Real, and it was all pre-owned luxury. And I loved doing that. And this, as I said, this is really before there was eBay before that, but there really wasn't anything else like that at the time outside of eBay that was very specifically tailored toward the same customer who would shop at a contemporary jewelry store. And I loved working on that because I was doing all the marketing and kind of content creation. And I loved thinking of creative ways to talk to people about pre-owned and about vintage, and doing it in a way that didn't feel old or didn't feel cheap or didn't feel flipping the script and rewriting that a little bit was a really fun job. And I think it really helped me think about how to talk to customers about it. Where, as I said, there's a lot of people, there's the people who like don't want to ever live, and they only want to live in a new house because they're like, ew, I don't want to like bathe in someone else's bathtub, like gross. You know what I mean? Whereas I'm the kind of person, I'm like, oh my God, there's an inscription with somebody's name from 1955 on the back of that watch. I want that. And that is staying. I want to live with that. I want that with me. Somebody else's story. And so there are two kinds of people, but I do think there is room to, and I think I've changed a lot of minds, I will say, because I go out and do a lot of trunk shows and I bring vintage jewelry.
And what is that epiphanic moment? You were saying there's someone who's looking at a piece, tell them and the lights go up.
Yeah, you really do.
What's the unlock there?
Sometimes it's a combination of things. Look, sometimes it's just the price. Sometimes people are like,
it's pretty and I can afford it.
Whoa, not even I can afford it, but it's just, whoa, this price for this piece, if I were looking at a contemporary piece from today, it would be way more expensive. Like sometimes it's just that, and someone clicks into that and they understand and they're like, oh, that's interesting. But a lot of times it is I see it a lot when I'm at a trunk show and there's like groups of friends who are there shopping, right? And sometimes a couple of them will like the same piece. And they'll both try it on, and then I can see their head spinning, and then I can see that they're, oh, what are we going to do? But I do think that creates this sense of urgency around it, and this sense of it's very quick how you can get attached to something that you may never see again. And I always say, nothing will haunt you like the vintage you didn't buy, because it's true. Sometimes there's a piece, and then I'll spend the next 3 years on like eBay or Etsy or antique shows looking for something similar, and you just may never find it.
There's a steamer trunk I should have bought 12 years ago that is still haunting me.
Oh, there are things that haunt me, but I think you can see it click where they're like, wait, that thing that I just saw 5 minutes ago, and you see someone else looking at it and you're like, but I need that. And if I don't have it, if someone else has it, then that's going to be sad. And it is sad. And I don't know. I think it is, we've had a lot of fun introducing people to this concept, even though it seems like obvious. Like, of course, there's vintage jewelry in the world, but not a lot of people have access to vintage jewelry, or maybe never thought of it outside of the context of a pawn shop or
the random box of stuff from grandma.
Exactly. So it's really, I love marketing and I love PR. And so a lot of it is spin. But this jewelry was actually mostly made by the same hands of the people in the workshops that were making Cartier, because the pieces that I curate for my collection, they're higher end, they are gemstone forward, they're bold silhouettes, there's a lot of heavy gold. So it's still things that are made in a way that stand the test of time by probably the same hands that were making the other jewelry. There's just not a brand name stamped in it. And so it really has been fun seeing people explore that and start to understand it. And once you get a taste, though, then you're like, what else do you have for me? It's like it's a little bit of an addiction. What other weird thing can you find for me? Which I love doing with people.
You've talked a lot about how much your own style and your own taste informs your work. Tell us about your material world.
As I said, I'm a vintage girl. And I think that has actually gotten much more so as I've grown up, gotten older. I just appreciate the quality of things. And I also just, as I said, like things that nobody else has. So I literally drive a vintage car. Like most
What do you drive?
Furniture. I drive a Mercedes 560 SL.
From what year?
From 1987. And I love it.
What color?
It's like this kind of mushroomy, grayish color. And yeah, I collect vintage furniture, wear mostly vintage clothes. I have a whole network of people here in LA and all around who I buy stuff from. So I think just the uniqueness factor, it works really well with the contemporary designers I work with as well, because I'm looking for people who have an eye for something that like you just can't find otherwise in jewelry. But it is interesting. I love the thrill of the hunt, basically. I think that's the thing. I love a deal. I don't spend a ton of money on my clothes, but people think I do. And that's really a testament to how things were made and a long time ago. And also just
and your discernment in putting it together.
Yeah. I think what I've always been best at is I have a good eye. I have a good curatorial eye. I love the mix of patterns and textures, and the same thing with interior design. I just really gravitate towards that visual language, whether it's fashion, interiors, art. And that's how we live. In my house too, my husband works in the art world. He's a curator and a journalist as well. And I would say 90% of the things in our house, somebody that we know made it. Besides the actual art, which is everywhere, it's overwhelming. But like every vase we have, someone made it. Every candlestick holder, someone made it, or it's a memory from somewhere. And we don't really go to the store and buy anything like that. Even like our bowls and plate, it's crazy. But I love being surrounded by that. I like being surrounded by things that were touched by people's hands, or you feel a little bit of their brain in it. It reminds you of them. That to me is what I live for, especially in my home and myself. Everything feels personal,
has an
sentimental
animating spirit.
Yeah. I'm a sentimental person for sure.
What are you wearing today?
Oh, what I put on today, and this is. I'm wearing this torque necklace that has all like 100 charms on it, and they're all from all different parts of my life, including literally like probably some ballet slippers they're all gold charms from my bat mitzvah, up to things that designers have made that I've purchased, vintage things that came off of pieces of relatives, a charm of my grandmother's.
We'll get a picture of this and we'll include this in the Substack post so that you can see what Randi's wearing. Yeah.
It's cool. And so things like this are like my safety pieces. Like this is something I wear if I travel because it just feels safe, has all my things. And then the mix.
Covering a variety of eras. It sounds like this is decades worth of life.
It really is. And every little one. Some are things I represent my daughter, like her initial, or gifts that were given to me by people. And so I like to hold all of that stuff really close. And I'm like a big jewelry girl. I'm a little person who likes big jewelry. I love gemstones. As I said, I don't know if we actually touched on this, but I worked for a mining company called Gemfields for a few years. I was the marketing director. Got to do so many cool things with them.
Gemfields is primarily an emerald company.
Correct.
Mostly in Zambia.
Correct. But really focused on sustainable mining. So I loved the ethos of the company, and I got to do a lot of really great projects working with designers who created jewelry and got to bring people to the mines to experience that. Got to do some great ad campaigns. But so one of the pieces I'm wearing, which is a Harwell Godfrey ring, has a Gemfields emerald in it. So keeping that part of my history close, and emerald is my birthstone too. And Lauren actually has a matching ring. We have from the same parcel. So those are our best friendship pinky emerald Gemfields rings that I love to have. And I'm wearing a bunch of contemporary rings. The ring that I wear every day, my diamond ring, is Retrouvaille, an incredible brand out of Los Angeles who I've worked with for many years. Kirsty Stone, incredible designer. And I have one of my favorite pieces, this Jade Russo opal ring, which this was the very first one. She calls it the drumhead ring. Her collection, one of her collections is based on percussion instruments. Her dad was a drummer. And so this is the drumhead ring, and it has this big opal that she found in Tucson. Incredible.
Luminous.
And it's like my favorite opal I've ever seen in my life. And we were doing the couture show, and she pulled it out. No one had seen it yet. She had just gotten it there and just came out of production. And I looked at it and I said, "Put it away. It's mine." No, yeah. I'm like, "That's mine." Yeah. I'm like, "No one can have that. You can show it to people. It is sold. It's mine." So I love big, colorful gemstones, really thing. And I also sell, as I said, I sell vintage watches, which I'm obsessed with. I love vintage watches. My pride and joy, my 1960s Bulgari Serpenti, which is quite truly my favorite thing ever. Because back in the 60s and 70s, they made really weird versions of this. They were all different sizes, different faces. And I was very lucky to have found it before the boom happened from an eBay antiques dealer who maybe didn't know exactly what they had at the time, but...
Caveat emptor, yep.
Exactly.
Or seller emptor.
And then also I mixed some bracelets, like vintage bracelets, which in fact, they have cabochon gemstones on them, but they used to be earrings from the 80s that I had made into bangles because I do that a lot, like weird old things that I have. And then I was speaking before about Harwell Godfrey, about her kind of geometric language of design. I think these bangles that I have are called her chubby bangles with inlay gemstones really speak to that visual language with the triangles and things that really represent her brand. And I, in fact, picked out all of these opal shards myself in Tucson from a great dealer that we work with who I'm obsessed with so that I could have kind of the colors I wanted all represented in this bangle. Yeah. And then, you know what? I have these two. I have these great little huggy earrings with gemstones, and these I collected from a great friend, gem dealer, Dave Bindra, who always has the best, most beautiful color. And we curated a little set of chrysoberyl and spinel, lilac spinel, one diamond.
They're hearts, yeah.
They're hearts. Yeah. And one Podporosha sapphire. So I like a lot. I like bold. I like color. I like yellow gold. I'm a statement jewelry kind of girl. But of course I'm wearing like a vintage caftan because also comfort and cute. Pattern on pattern.
Yeah.
And
More
I also,
is best.
Yeah, and I collect vintage bags too, which I love that kind of stuff as well. Occasionally I'll be the girl who walks into a store and buys a handbag, like if it's special, like when I was in Paris and went into Schiaparelli and bought a handbag because my daughter was there and we went overboard. But normally I like old things there too. And I just got this 2005 original Louis Vuitton Murakami cherry handbag that I'm like obsessed with. It's so cute. But again, like pattern on pattern, color on color, extra is more is better for me.
What are you seeing in the world, either in fashion and style or in jewelry particularly, that's exciting to you?
I think again, as we touched on, a diversity of voices is interesting to me. I was really excited to see that Grace Wales Bonner was appointed to be the menswear director at Hermes. I think that's like fabulous. She's an incredible tailor, a really interesting artistic voice. And I think having somebody in that position at a legacy brand like Hermes is really exciting and interesting. And I'm hoping there's more of that because for me, while there are some phenomenal designers who are up at the upper echelon of fashion right now, move around from one house to the other. It's
There's
like
a lot of turnover in that menswear position every 4 decades, whether they need a new designer or not. Hermes gets somebody.
Yes, for sure. But I just think in general, it's like the same 6 people who are just like going from house to house. And I don't find that entirely interesting. But I do. So I think having someone like that come in is good for sure. And otherwise, I think, as I said, vintage wise, which is just great for the world in so many ways. I've just been able to introduce a lot of people to that world too who never would have thought to like wear vintage, or they only think of it as, I don't want to go to Goodwill or like a thrift store, but there's like this whole world of like really beautifully curated but still affordable vintage out there in the world that people are able to create much more of their own unique style that way, which that's what I'm here for.
What does the jewelry industry still need to learn? What are we missing from things that are happening in the world?
It's a great question. I think we're getting away from that focus on commodity, which I think is great. I think what we need to do a better job teaching is the process. One of the incredible brands that I work with is a designer named Vanessa Fernandez. And she is a trained sculptor, and she makes one-of-a-kind pieces, but she makes them herself at the bench, but she does everything. She's purchases the raw gold. She's alloying it herself into her own custom alloy.
She's doing it.
This is not CAD. This is not computer aided design. This is her with a incredible gemstone sitting down at the bench and seeing what comes out of her brain and what she makes around that. And I do think that there's like a need to tell that kind of story in general in the business, because a focus on people and creatives like that help really tell the story of, circling back from our whole beginning of our conversation, why this is rare, why this is important, why this is art, why this is heirloom, why this costs so much, all of those things. And like really being able to see the life cycle of jewelry from start to finish, I think is maybe the thing we lack at doing really well. I think it's done here and there, certainly, but so much is put on the importance of the final product that the getting there part it's hard to tell that story in a short amount of time. I understand why it's a difficult story to tell, but I do think people like Vanessa or other designers that really do the whole thing from start to finish is a great way to tell the story of how rare and precious jewelry really is.
Yeah. What's next for you? What's next for Future Reference?
We've actually been having a really great year because I have such an incredible group of designers that I work with and such great stores that we work with. And surprisingly, even in such turmoil and gold prices and everything, we're still having a really fabulous year. And I'm really excited to help keep growing and building these designer brands and helping them navigate the wild west of the marketplace that we live in right now. And then doing some really fun things with the vintage. They're still a little under wraps at this moment, but things that I'm really excited about. I want to make that a little more mainstream too and do some cool things and continue educating people on all the cool things that are out there in the world.
Where are there opportunities in the market? We were talking earlier about mentoring new designers. If someone was coming to you and said, all right, I want to find some white space, are there opportunities?
For sure. There always are. There's always space for unique voices, 100%. But as we said, I think it's just all about making sure that is an actual unique voice. And I'm trying to think if there's something very specific where I feel like we're missing this in the business. I don't know. If I knew that, then I probably would do it myself, honestly.
We can see what it is that you're doing. So obviously there's some revealed preference there.
Yeah, for sure. But I also think for people like that, or people who are trying to break into jewelry just in general, there's a lot of research you can do to see what's already out there and make sure that you're bringing something fresh to the table. And I think that's really important, is doing your research and also really having firsthand knowledge. If you're not the one who's sitting there making the jewelry yourself, having a lot of firsthand knowledge of how that jewelry is being made, who is doing it, whether you're hand choosing all the stones yourself or as I said, most of my designers, we go to Tucson together and we're picking stones and coming up with ideas on the fly. When you look at something that speaks to you or moves you, I think it's like having your hand or your eye like really touching every part of the project from beginning to end that's going to resonate with that end customer. And you can feel it. You can really feel when, especially if you're, let's say, meeting with a designer at a trunk store or something, and they can really tell you that story of this, oh my gosh, they're like, wow, this is a really expensive $40,000 pendant. And it's, let me tell you the story of this pendant. And there's levels and layers, and really being able to articulate and understand how that piece came to life and that it came from somewhere inside of you. I think that's just a really important thing for people to share with their customers so that you can really get a better sense of how it all works.
Yeah. If people want to find you on the internet
Yes.
or wherever else you exist, where can you be located?
I can be located at forfuturereference.com. We also have a great, really fun Instagram with tons of jewelry, press, and all kinds of fabulous stuff. And that's also at for_future_reference. And then if you're into the vintage separately, just like the vintage stuff and clothes and outfit inspo, that's my personal jam. So that's just me at Randi Molofsky on Instagram. And I think that's just like where I put all my weird outfit vibes into the world. Clown couture, I call it sometimes. But it's been actually really lovely. There are times where I've been like at a art fair or in the airport, and someone's come up to me and they're like, I follow you on Instagram, and like, you give me so much inspiration of how to get dressed and have more fun. And I'm like, wow, that to me is the ultimate compliment, and nothing makes me happier than hearing something like that.
Adding joy to the world. Nothing better than that.
Exactly.
Randi Molofsky, thank you.
Thanks, Marc. This is great.
That's it for this episode of The Materialist. If you like what you heard, please like, rate, and subscribe to The Materialist wherever you get your podcasts. The Materialist is a presentation of At Present, Matchmaker to Extraordinary Jewelry. We'll see you next time.